The first lesson is from Psalm 8. Think for a moment about the times you have experienced pure awe. In our first lesson, we hear what filled the psalm writer with awe. Psalm 8. O Lord, our sovereign, how majestic is your name in all the earth. You have set your glory above the heavens. Out of the mouths of babes and infants you have founded a bulwark because of your foes, to silence the enemy and the avenger. When I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars that you have established, what are human beings that you are mindful of them, mortals that you care for them? Yet you have made them a little lower than God, and crowned them with glory and honor. You have given them dominion over the works of your hands. You have put all things under their feet, all sheep and oxen, and also the beasts of the field, the birds of the air, and the fish of the sea. Whatever passes along the paths of the seas. O Lord, our sovereign, how majestic is your name in all the earth. Our second lesson is a reading from Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. In the chapter, The Sound of Silverbells of her book Braiding Sweetgrass, Robin Wall Kimmerer shares a story about her first job teaching biology as she was finishing her dissertation. She was teaching in a small Christian college in North Carolina that had a reputation for preparing students to enter medical schools. She took a class on a camping trip to the Smoky Mountains. As Kimmerer and her students hiked and drove up the mountains, she stopped to point out scientific facts and concepts that they could see in nature. This is a reading from Braiding Sweetgrass, The Sound of Silverbells. After many miles and many lectures, at last it was Sunday afternoon. Job done, mountains climbed, data collected. My pre-med students were dirty and tired, their notebooks filled with more than 150 non-human species and the mechanisms behind their distribution. I'd have a good report for the dean. We hiked back to the vans in the late golden light, through a stand filled with the pendant blooms of mountain silverbell that seemed to glow from within like pearly lanterns. The students were awfully quiet, tired, I imagined. With mission accomplished, I was happy just to watch the slant of hazy light over the mountains for which the park is justly famous. A hermit thrush sang out from the shadows, and a little breeze brought a shoulder of white petals around us as we walked in that amazing place. I was suddenly so sad. In that moment, I knew that I had failed. I had failed to teach the kind of science that I had longed for as a young student, seeking the secret of asters and goldenrod, a science deeper than data. I had given them so much information, all the patterns and processes laid on so thick as to obscure the most important truth. I missed my chance, leading them down every path save the one that matters most. How will people ever care for the fate of moss spiders if we don't teach students to recognize and respond to the world as gift? I'd told them all about how it works and nothing of what it meant. We may as well have stayed home and read about the Smokies. In effect, against all my prejudices, I'd worn a white lab coat into the wilderness. Betrayal is a heavy load, and I plodded along, suddenly weary. I turned to see the students coming down the trail behind me, a petal-strewn path in gauzy light. One person, I don't know who, began to sing, ever so quietly, those familiar first notes, the ones that open your throat, irresistibly calling you to sing. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. One by one, they joined in, singing in the long shadows in a drift of white petals settling on our shoulders. That saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. She goes on, I was humbled. Their singing said everything that my well-intentioned lectures did not. On they went, adding harmonies as they walked. They understood harmonies in a way that I did not. I heard in their raised voices the same outpouring of love and gratitude for the creation that Sky Woman first sang on the back of Turtle Island. In their caress of that old hymn, I came to know that it wasn't naming the source of wonder that mattered, it was wonder itself.
I think it's safe to say that Psalm 8 is my favorite psalm. It is verses 3 and 4 that get me every time. When I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars that you have established, what are human beings that you are mindful of them, mortals that you care for them? These verses always take me back to my childhood, to hot summers in New Hampshire and weekends up at the family cabin. The lake was almost free of light pollution. The incandescent lights on the houses on the far side of the lake really didn't glow very far. And there was only our cottage, our cabin, our end of the lake, and one other down the lake on our side. And so it was quiet. The state highway quieted down when the sun set. And so there wasn't a whole lot of headlights shining in. And on nights when the moon had gone down or hadn't risen yet, then it was dark enough that one could really see the stars. And I swear there were nights when the stars were so bright that I could find my way from the porch down to the lakeside without a flashlight. I was a lot younger, my eyes were. And some nights I'd go out in the rowboat or the canoe, or if it was really hot, for a swim, and get out in the lake and look up outside the trees where you could really see the fullness of the sky and see the stars and that smudge of light that is the Milky Way. I wish that I had a camera in those days where I could have taken a picture like this. This is what it looked like. The composer of the psalm saw these same night lights, this same light show. And for the composer of the psalm, it was as if these lights were hung in the dome of the sky. The composer had no knowledge of the heliocentric solar system. The composer had no knowledge of the vastness of the universe. Heck, I didn't even know that most of what I thought were stars in that night sky were actually entire galaxies with billions upon billions of stars in each one of them. Yet when the composer of the psalm looked into the night sky, and when I look into the night sky, I am filled with awe. I am more likely to experience awe when I get away from the constructed world and into the created world. 7 years ago, I began a sabbatical by going on a road trip with my nephew along the Pacific coast up to Washington. Sam was really into making pictures of sunsets. And so he did. Again and again and again, and made a point of stopping along the coast to capture sunsets. Well, one place we stopped on the Oregon coast, we took some photos of the sun setting, and I took what I think is the best photograph I've ever taken in my life. This one. I managed to catch the light of the lighthouse and the ripples of the water and the sun just above the horizon before it went down. And I do really feel proud about the picture. But what filled me with awe was the sunset itself. After dropping my nephew off at his home in Olympia, I turned east and traveled to Glacier National Park. The views were stunning, and I was so glad I had a digital camera, not a film camera, because I kept taking picture after picture after picture, and had it been on emulsion film, I can't imagine what the expense would have been when I got home. On one day hike, I stopped. It seemed like I was stopping every dozen yards or so to take a picture. It just was one beautiful view. After I had joked with somebody else I met in the park, well, when the glaciers are all gone, they'll just have to change the name from Glacier National Park to Photo Opportunity National Park. It was just stunning. And I was, one day hike, I was hiking along, and in the forest itself, a thick upper canopy. And then I came to a gap in the trees. It revealed a cliff on the other side of a little valley that a stream had carved over the eons. I loved the multicolored layers of rock and the way that they undulated in this image. You can sort of see that. On a better picture, you can see it a little better. But I stood there just looking at this formation, these lines, and thinking about how they were all layers of sediment laid down millions and millions of years ago that were then thrust up in some tectonic activity and then exposed over years of erosion. And being pulled out of my human sense of time into that geologic sense of time filled me with awe. I hiked on and met 5 other hikers, 4 amateurs and 1 professional photographer. And the professional was giving them hints about photographing stuff. And one of the things, they let me join them for a while. And one of the things he suggested was, don't just take the big, amazing pictures. Take some of the small things you notice. And I was really glad he said that, because I would have missed this had he not said, look for the small things, this little red blossom in amongst the green, nestled in the rocks. What use is this flower out there in the woods? Its purpose, it seems to me, is to bloom, to reproduce, so that the next generation of flowers can bloom, to reproduce. And maybe that's not much of a purpose. Maybe its purpose is beauty itself. Another blessing. I moved on from Glacier to the Grand Tetons, and the mountains demanded that I take some of the big pictures too, not just the little things. And so I did. And one evening, the sunset demanded that I make a photograph of it too. And sometimes the wildlife seemed to be challenging me, come take a picture. One early morning, I got up because I'd heard that there was a moose cow and calf down at the south end of the park. And so I got up and drove to the south end of the park. And along the way, I met this fella. And this is a really grainy picture because the sun wasn't up yet. And so the camera was trying to grab whatever light it could find. And so it came out really grainy. And he was some distance away too, just standing out there. And then he went away down over the edge. You can't really see it, but behind him is an edge into a gully where a stream was. So I continued south after he disappeared, another 10 miles to where the cow and the calf were, and found another bull who was chasing after the cow, who was having none of it, none of him. She was protecting her calf. She also had none of me taking a picture of her. I was a little disappointed in her about that. But so at least the guy did let me take a picture of him. Just amazing. It was actually that day I saw 8 different moose. One of the rangers said that I had seen probably half of the moose population in the park. Afternoons, the silhouettes would sometimes demand a picture, and early mornings, the rose and orange light of sunrise would demand a picture. Getting out into the natural world fills me with awe. Getting up close to the natural world fills me with awe. As I reflected this week on what fills me with awe, I realized that my first thoughts always go to the visual. But that's not the only way I connect with awe. I realize that music can connect me with awe as well. I remember the first time I heard Pachelbel's Canon in D. I was in high school working on some homework, and I had a question, it was probably math. So I went to my parents' bedroom where my parents were watching something on public television, and went in to ask the question, and I walked in, and they were watching a PBS program, and it had ended, and there was like 6 minutes to fill before the top of the hour, and the next program started. So somebody at the station decided to play Pachelbel's Canon, and for the visual, they just had what I think became Windows 3.1 screensaver, just playing. When I walked in the bedroom, this song was playing, and I sat on the cedar chest at the foot of my parents' bed and just listened in awe. When the song was finally over, I said something deeply profound, like, "Wow. But what else do you say?" Barber's Adagio for strings is another piece that does this for me. It moves me out of myself into a suspension of time and connects me with something bigger than myself. Other sounds can fill me with delight, which I think is an aspect of awe, or a different aspect of awe, delight. The sound of a baby's laughter, the gurgling, even a baby's cry, if I know the baby's being looked after, can fill me with delight. I wonder if that was true of the psalmist as well, who wrote, "Out of the mouths of babes and infants, you have formed a bulwark." I had a very different experience of awe this past week. A little over 3 months ago, I shared a little video that Hank Green had made. He had just been diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma, and I shared about that. By the way, he's in remission now in 3 months, which is pretty darn awe-inspiring, in my opinion. Well, the thing that happened this last week had more to do with Hank's brother, John. John has a tendency, it turns out, to find out about something bad that's going on, learning all he can about it, and then figuring out what can be done about it. Some time ago, John learned that every 20 seconds in the world, someone dies of tuberculosis. It is by far the world's deadliest infectious disease. Tuberculosis is a bacterial infection, and there are antibiotics that not only treat it, but cure it. It is a treatable, curable disease, and every 20 seconds, someone dies of it. One of the big challenges humanity has when it comes to curing TB is that some strains of the bacterium have become drug resistant, and some are not just highly drug resistant, but extremely drug resistant. And so getting the right diagnosis becomes really important. Getting the right meds becomes really important. Well, Johnson & Johnson makes a medicine called, well, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, betaquiline, something like that. Do you know what I'm talking about, Doc? How do you pronounce it correctly? Okay, betaquiline, okay. So something close to that. Anyway, they make this drug, and the patent of it was going to end couple months ago. Sorta. It was going to end and people could make generic drugs, except that they had patented 4 years later a slight improvement to it for its shelf life. And so the first patent was going to go out, but they could extend the second patent, the supplementary patent, another 4 years and keep generic drugs from being produced, which would keep their expensive brand drug at the prices high and out of the hands of poor countries that have high burdens of tuberculosis. So 2 months ago, John Green produced one of his Vlogbrother videos. He and Hank have 3.25 million followers on YouTube. So he's got a pretty far reach, and he called on his followers to launch a social media and letter emailing campaign to Johnson & Johnson to release their secondary patent. And it worked, sort of. Johnson & Johnson has not released the secondary patent, but they have committed to allowing generic betaquiline to be available in almost every country with a high burden of TB. They're allowing generics to be made. That was 3 months ago, in less than a week. And then it happened again this last week, because not only is it great to have the medicine that can cure TB available, you need to know who needs that medicine. And so that's about diagnosis. Well, it turns out that there is a way to figure out who has, really effectively and quickly, who has one of the high drug-resistant forms of TB. 12 days ago, John released another video. This is just a clip of that video. Whoops. This is a clip of that video.
Now, I know what you're thinking. Gosh, I wish we had a miraculously fast and accurate test that could tell people not only whether they have TB, but which drugs their TB will respond to, so we could immediately begin curative treatment. Well, good news, we do. It's called the Gene Expert Machine, and it is incredible. It's made by a company called Cepheid that's owned by a larger company, Danaher, that also owns lots of other companies. And this Gene Expert Machine can test not just for TB, but also for HIV, COVID, and many, many other diseases. Everywhere I've traveled in high TB burden countries, people sing the praises of this incredible Gene Expert Machine. I mean, within an hour, you can tell someone whether they have TB and also what course of treatment will cure their TB. Incredible, amazing, wondrous. Thank you, Cepheid, for building this machine. Thank you, Danaher, for making it all happen. There's just one problem. As a lab tech in Sierra Leone very succinctly explained to me, the machine is amazing, if only we could afford the tests. Which brings us to the printer ink business model. Now, you may know that inkjet printers are often sold at a very low profit margin because that's not actually how the companies make their money. They make their money by selling ink once you're locked into a printer, often ink that you can't buy from anywhere else. The same business model is used in disposable razor blades and also Nespresso, like take over the coffee market with inexpensive machines and then price gouge on the Nespresso pods. And that is what Danaher does with TB tests. And that's not like my conclusion. Their CEO, Rainer Blair, literally said these are razor blade business models in mission critical applications. Which sounds to me like they're bragging to their shareholders about ripping off the world's poorest people. Okay, so Danaher currently charges $10 for each of these cartridges, which can detect TB and also test for resistance to a common first-line antibiotic. And they also make another cartridge that tests for resistance to 4 more anti-TB drugs. For that one, they charge not $10, but $15, which is frustrating because, one, we really need to identify extensively drug-resistant tuberculosis quickly and accurately to prevent its further spread. And also, two, it doesn't cost Danaher more to make those cartridges than the regular ones. All the cartridges cost them about the same to make. So how much should these cartridges cost? Well, Danaher has refused to share any of their cost information with global health authorities, but in 2019, Doctors Without Borders commissioned a study asking a group to look at how much it costs to make these. And what they found is that it costs somewhere between $3 and $4.50. The same is true for all of Danaher's test cartridges, regardless of whether they're they're testing for TB or XDR-TB or HIV or anything else. Based on that study, Danaher is charging at least a 220% profit margin for their regular TB cartridges and closer to a 500% profit margin for their extensively drug-resistant cartridges, which in my opinion is just unconscionable. And I apologize if I sound angry, but I've known so many people who went undiagnosed for months or even for years, and some of those people have died. And so I am angry. They died because they couldn't get an accurate test in time, and I simply don't believe that Danaher charging these profit margins is making it easier for anyone who needs the test to be able to access it. Instead, they are overcharging poor countries for tests and preventing competition by locking people into their machines with that printer ink business model they love to boast about.
So go ahead and make money, Danaher, just not an obscene amount of money, and stop gouging poor countries. And within a week, Danaher agreed that their standard TB cartridges would be sold at low-income, high TB burden countries at cost, and they were going to let a third party audit their books to prove that they're only charging their costs for it. Now, they haven't agreed to do that with the extremely drug-resistant cartridges, diagnostic cartridges that they sell at a 500% markup, but they have agreed to do it with their standard. And that's within 1 week of people putting pressure on a corporation to change the behavior. That news filled me with awe. Yes, it is a different kind of awe than I feel when I look up at the Milky Way, and is a different kind of awe that when I look at a beautiful mountain or the strata in a rock formation or the beauty of a little red blossom at the side of the hiking trail. And it's different from the awe I feel when I hear a piece of music that moves me into the universe and the holy, or when a baby gurgles and fills me with delight. It is a different sort of awe, but it is awe. In her story about her pre-med students on a camping trip, taking her pre-med students on a camping trip, Dr. Kimmerer concludes that the students singing Amazing Grace said everything that my well-intentioned lectures did not. On and on they went, adding harmonies as they walked. They understood harmony in a way that I did not. I heard in their raised voices the same outpouring in love and gratitude for the creation that Sky Woman first sang on the back of Turtle Island. In their caresses of that old hymn, I came to know that it wasn't naming the source of wonder that mattered. It was wonder itself. So go out and be wonder-filled. Go out and be awesome. Amen.